So we got a tiny eagle carrying a huge dragon.
Paganism is very similar to bureaucracy.
I love when you get an image of a woman.
Grond. 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 Hello, and welcome to Winnow, a couple's close reading of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I'm Owen Gemmer.
I'm Isabella Gemmer. We are married and we love to talk about books together.
In this podcast, we are working our way through the entirety of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, book by book. This particular episode will cover book 12 of the Iliad.
Indeed. This is the shortest book yet, potentially, in the whole of the Iliad, book 12.
We haven't double-checked that, but it's definitely the shortest so far.
Not 100% sure, but I think it's up there.
It's short. We're going to begin like we do with summaries, where I write a short poem and Bella does a creative writing assignment, sort of.
Yeah,
do you want to start or you want me to start? I switched mine up a little bit.
Ooh, that's exciting. Let's do yours first then.
Okay. So the past couple times I've done this, I've done a limerick just because limericks are really fun to write. But because this book was shorter, I wanted to switch it up and do a haiku. I also wanted to challenge myself because oftentimes we think of a haiku primarily by its syllable count, the 575 syllables. And that is obviously a really crucial part of a haiku. But haikus also often... Like a haiku often is also a description of the kind of content, where oftentimes haikus are meant to be kind of like single images that like pack a punch, that it's oftentimes an image of nature and somehow oftentimes nature relating to the divine and those sorts of things. And so I thought this book had a pretty good image that I could sort of build off of with that, and also challenge myself with the syllabification of everything. A wall made of stones has been breached but not destroyed, only squashed by gods.
That pretty much sums it up, folks.
Yeah, I like just the wall. I think it's fun to challenge yourself when you're writing poetry with syllable constraints to think of those as very different from word length constraints. And so I tried to use long words that are still one syllable. So breached is just one syllable, but it's B-R-E-A-C-H-E-D, 8 letters for one syllable, and then squashed as well, S-Q-U-A-S-H-E-D. Both of them are 8-letter words that are still only one syllable. And English is just fun like that. Like English is one of the weird languages where you can get, like a really long word that's just like one syllable.
I wrote a summary. I did not use words that contained the letter W, which is challenging for a book all about the wall. This book starts by jumping to the future. The narrator paints a picture of the battlefield long after the battle is over and the Greeks have returned home. Apollo and Poseidon flood the plain and destroy the barrier the Greeks have built to protect their ships. Jumping back to the fighting, Hector is on a rampage. The Trojans are on the Greeks' doorstep. Polydamas encourages Hector to ditch the chariots, and the Trojans push on by foot. Some Trojans attempt to break through the barrier's gates, but are unable to. Then there's an omen. An eagle holding a snake flies overhead. The snake bites the eagle, and the eagle drops it. Polydamas tells Hector that it's an ill omen for them, and they should retreat. Hector doesn't listen. It is meaningless to him. Sarpedon rallies Glaucus, and they charge. Ajax counters them with Teucer. They kill Epides and badly injure Glaucus and Sarpedon. Hector uses a huge boulder to break open the gates.
Excellent. Yeah, so you also had to work around war changing.
Yeah. It was actually harder to, if it was harder to remember to not use the word war.
Yeah, just because that's kind of what the whole Iliad is about.
Yeah. So that was the hardest part, probably.
We wanted to focus on the wall, both because many versions in English that sort of give chapter titles to these books call this, the wall or something like that. But just like it is the first image that is, as you noted, the sort of flash forward. And then it's kind of the last image of Hector kind of, like breaking through the walls into the Greek camp. And so it kind of bookends and is the kind of centerpiece and the dividing line between the armies that has to be breached.
This book is it's so interesting that it starts by jumping far into the future. So all of this battle is temporary, right? This battle is going to be over one day, and the Greeks are going to go back home. But this weird wall is still going to be there, kind of like right on the shoreline. And so Apollo and Poseidon, they spend, it's like 9 days. They get all of the rivers to converge, and they flood the wall, and it breaks into all these pieces and floats off into the ocean. And then they push fresh new sand onto the beach. And it's quite powerful because that's how this book starts. And it ends with, the best that Hector can do, the best that one man can do is throw a boulder and break down the gates to get through the wall. And so there's this very interesting contrast between the things that the gods can do, but I do read it more as the things that time and nature can do, versus the thing that the max effort of one man, and comparing those two things.
Yeah, because that's interesting that you see it more as nature and not as the gods, because I read it as the gods because it's very clear right at the beginning that Poseidon and Apollo are destroying this wall because it was built sort of without the consent of the gods or against the will of the gods. Because the Greeks didn't sort of offer the right sacrifices and sort of ask for permission to build this thing. If you remember a couple books ago, when they first built it, Poseidon was kind of really angry at this. And Zeus was like, let it be, whatever, chill out. But now it seems like more of the gods are angry. At least Apollo is joining in.
I definitely think it's some sort of indication that the wall is improper.
Yeah.
There's something maybe feudal about it. That's kind of what I sort of took that as.
I think that's really interesting. I think it's just way more literal. Okay. I think because I think it's just they built it in a hurry and didn't offer the right sacrifices, and so the gods are mad because they built this grand thing that's really impressive without the proper blessings. And so to me, it sort of lines up with this theory I've been thinking about as we've read, that sort of paganism is very similar to bureaucracy, because it's
yes.
They didn't get the proper building permits. So the government came in and sort of demolished their building in the same way, they didn't offer the right sacrifices to the right gods. So now the gods are angry and they're destroying the wall.
I also, while reading this book, for some reason, paganism was also on my mind as well. I wrote pagan in the corner of one of the pages. Yeah, there's a lot in this book about the sort of nature of exchange in
transactionality.
Pagan. The transactionality, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, the transactionality of the relationship between mortals and pagan gods, where it's very do X thing, get Y result.
Right.
And that seems to be a theme, definitely throughout this book.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I read it not as this grand statement about nature or the course of time, but more about the pettiness of the gods in this way. And maybe I think in my head, I'll explain a little more. I'm thinking about this as it juxtaposes to one of my favorite poems, Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley, which I think is a similar thing of kind of a grand structure that has been sort of weathered away and sort of washed over with sands, right? You pointed out that they wash sands back on, and the last line of Ozymandias is, "The lone and level sands stretch far away." But in the case of Ozymandias, I think that one is more clearly a statement of the power of kind of history and time that eventually sort of and nature as well, that the course of time through nature's power and through sort of history crumbles all empires. Whereas here, it actually isn't that long. It's not far into the future. It's a couple of years, where you would expect a stone wall to last more than a couple of years, but they're destroying it ahead of time, ahead of when its natural course would destroy it. So yeah, once the fighting starts again, there is this sort of general goal of the Trojans breaking through the wall. Hector's doing a lot, but Sarpedon also is doing that. You made note in your summary of Sarpedon's speech. Can you talk a little more about that and what you find interesting in it?
Yeah, Sarpedon has an interesting moment where he's trying to rally Glaucus and a couple other people to really charge. And it has like a darker tone to it. And I also want to note that since we've read book 10, since the night raid, Odysseus and Diomedes' night raid in book 10, these other books, 11 and 12, they have had a darker tone to them. Like, I feel like a very distinct tonal shift has taken place. I feel like up until around that point, like, I had been watching more like a Marvel movie, you know, up until book 10. And then book 10 and now to 12, I feel like I'm watching maybe more like a sad documentary.
Or like a Saving Private Ryan kind of thing.
Just like just a different genre of war movie, almost. Yeah, so Sarpedon, he talks to Glaucus. He opens his speech with like, why do we as leaders get the finest seats at banquets, full cups of wine, the choicest cuts of meat? He's kind of leaning into like talking about like their sort of like leadership privilege, you could say. Mm-hmm. Like, why do we get to be the ones who get, you know, they're named in the Iliad. So like, why are they so special? And ultimately he says it's like, because they're the ones who have to be on the front line, confront the heat of battle. He's kind of nodding to this concept of, I think, responsibility. Like, it's not all fun to be named in the Iliad, you know? You have to kind of earn it, and you have to be at the front. But then he goes on, you see, my brother, if we could escape this war and then be free from age and death forever, I would never choose to fight or join the champion fighters at the front. Nor would I urge you to participate in war where men win glory. But in fact, a million ways to die stand all around us. No mortal can escape or flee from death. So let us go. Perhaps we shall succeed and win a triumph from another's death. Or somebody may win triumph over us. It's not very rousing because he's kind of like, if we could live forever, we would not do this.
Right.
If we were one of the gods, we would not choose to fight.
Right. Yeah, and then there's kind of only two options, right? Either we win and we get great glory, or we die and somebody else gets glory for killing us. And he's like, that's kind of the only two outcomes here.
Yes.
So it's pretty bleak in that sense. Or maybe not bleak, because obviously one of the options is good from their perspective. Like, we triumph from another's death. So it's not bleak so much as stark. He's just kind of like, yeah, this is what's happening.
I mean, I think his argument is ultimately that we're going to die anyways.
Right. So we may as well try and get the glory.
Yeah.
I do find it really interesting in contrast with Achilles, because Achilles has kind of the option, not of becoming immortal, but this thing of like leaving the war and growing to old age and not fighting. And as of right now, Achilles is sort of choosing that option. We know he's going to come back, but that Sarpedon here is sort of wrestling with the same question of like, to leave the war and live a long, sort of unassuming life, or to live a potentially short life, but maybe get a bunch of glory from it. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of both in some ways wrestling with that question. And everybody here maybe is.
Yeah. But some of these guys seem a little bit more resigned to the fact that they're going to die.
Yeah.
And that they should just kind of go for it.
Yeah. But there also is, on the Trojan side, a lot of hope that maybe, right, they are getting closer and closer to the Greeks. By the end, they break through the wall. That, like, maybe we actually will win this war, like, right here, right now. And we will be the ones to win glory, and it will be the Greeks who go off into history without any glory. Mm-hmm.
I think that leads nicely to Greek time.
So for this moment, we have chosen a segment that Bella initially sort of flagged as potentially interesting, and then I did some research to figure out that it actually is quite interesting. So will you read the little section that sort of initially struck you?
Yeah. This is Polydamas talking to Hector about how they're trying to cross the trench before the wall, and he's basically telling him that, you know, we need to dismount from our horses and chariots and go on foot. If Zeus, who thunders from on high, is planning to help the Trojans and to crush the Greeks, intending devastation for them all, I hope he makes it happen right away, and that they die here far away from Greece, nameless. But if they rally and turn around, leaving their ships and push us in the trench and gain the upper hand on us, I think none of us Trojans will escape the Greeks, even to take the bad news back to Troy.
So the word that struck out to you was?
Nameless.
Yes, in Emily Wilson's translation. And so I looked it up. In the Greek, this word is nonumnus. Nonumnus, does it sound similar to anything in English? Anonymous?
Anonymous?
Anonymous, yeah. It's related to our word for anonymous. So there's a negation. In our English word, we get the alpha, the A with it, the an, but here it's just the N part of that. So the ne, and then onoma is the Greek word for noun. And so it's, like without name. And so that on its own isn't that interesting, but I think the ways that this relates to other, both English stuff and Greek stuff is cool. So that onoma, meaning name, is also, if you are familiar with the word onomatopoeia, that is notoriously hard to spell, that is the same root word, onoma, and then poieia. And poieia is related to our word for poetry, but it really means to sort of create. So onomatopoeia is that which creates its name. And so it's that sort of cyclicality, like it makes its name. So boom makes the name of itself. And for some Owen Gemmer lore in college, I did stand-up comedy, and I made a set that I named onomatocomedic as a pun on onomatopoetic, because rather than doing poetry, I was doing comedy that was all about names and things like that. There's more than just Owen lore that makes this interesting. So the whole phrase, or this whole line, I'm going to try and read it, and I'm going to butcher the meter and rhythm, but nonumnus apolestai apargeos and thad akaios is an epithet in some ways. So it appears actually 2 other times beyond this in the Iliad, this exact same phrasing. In the next book, book 13, and then in the following book, book 14. So 12, 13, and 14, they all have this exact same line in the Greek, that in the Lattimore translation, he translates exactly the same each time. Do you want to guess if Emily Wilson does it the same each time?
Probably not.
Yeah, I looked ahead in yours while you were working out, and she does it differently. So this goes back to what we were talking about last week, I believe, with Emily Wilson's sort of different approach to epithets, where Homer has oftentimes these repeated lines that become sort of familiar to people. So this idea, like the Greeks will die far away from their homeland, is this kind of like repetitive omen coming up over and over again. But Emily Wilson, because she recognizes that oftentimes readers in the modern day can get bored of repetition and see repetition as a weakness, sort of translates them slightly differently for context. So one of the interesting things that she does in book 14, this sort of prophecy is being uttered by Agamemnon himself. Like, what if Zeus has foretold that the Achaeans sort of will die far away? And so she actually translated, it's like, we will lose our names, rather than like, if it's a Trojan saying it, they will lose their names or something like that. And so Emily Wilson sort of switches the perspective from it, whereas in the Greek and in Lattimore and other sort of more literal translations, it's more just kind of this objective kind of statement of like, they will be destroyed, anonymous, like, and they will be left nameless and destroyed far away from their homeland.
I always find it interesting, the different worries that the Greeks have about their deaths, and one of them is that they will be they'll be buried in such a way that their name will be forgotten. They'll also be buried in such a way that like their grave is not like marked in some more permanent way, which is something that will also come back in the Odyssey when we get to it. But
that's actually a perfect transition, because I went even deeper, and this word is also used 3 different times in the Odyssey. So it's not a part of the same epithet, because it's not about sort of the Achaeans being destroyed far away from their homeland. But there are 3 different times. One is in book 1 of the Odyssey, when Athena is talking to Telemachus. Another one is in book 13, when Odysseus has arrived back home on Ithaca, and Athena is talking with him in disguise, and Odysseus is kind of playing dumb, and Athena is like, surely you know what this land is. It's so famous. It's like, it's not nameless. Why are you so confused as to where you are? And they're kind of being cheeky with one another. And then it is also used in the next book as Eumaeus, the old goat herd, is talking to Odysseus, who is in disguise, about Telemachus, basically saying, hey, Telemachus is out on this journey and all the suitors are kind of like waiting to ambush him and leave his whole family nameless.
Yeah.
And so in that case, that last one is really interesting. And obviously we'll talk about this when we get to it, which will be a while from now. But the idea that, right, they all believe Odysseus to be dead. And so if Telemachus dies, then the whole family line is gone.
Yeah. Namelessness is not just about the individual.
Right.
Yeah. But it's about the end of some sort of familial line and a whole end of a name.
Right.
Yeah. Not just the end of one individual.
Right. But also it has to do with the sort of common notion, right? When Athena is talking about Ithaca, she's talking about the kind of like the fame of this land has sort of spread. Like everybody knows Ithaca. Come on. And so everybody knows who the Achaeans were. Come on. Like there's both the kind of personal fear of namelessness that you will die without leaving a legacy. And then there's also the more kind of broad, like your country, your people, your nation will also sort of fade into existence. And I think that level on both, again, the sort of grander historical scale and the more sort of personal legacy scale, again, reminds me back of Ozymandias, because I think that's also what that poem is really sort of critiquing, is this desire to sort of like make ourselves known and make ourselves last through history. But obviously I think with Ozymandias and with here, there's an interesting irony given that we are still reading these and their names have lived on. Like Ozymandias, people know that name because of that poem and that poem kind of alone. Yeah. Like if anybody's heard that name, it's because of the poem or things directly inspired by it. And so in the same way, like Sarpedon, like most people probably, if they've heard of Sarpedon, know Sarpedon because of the Iliad. And so the fact that they were so afraid of having their names erased, but then Homer wrote them down, or Percy by Shelley wrote that poem or whatever, whether intentionally or not, ended up continuing the legacy. Yeah.
I mean, we could question, there's a certain irony to it, because we could question if whether in the moment, you know, whatever real historical events correlated to these events in the Iliad, we can question whether they were in the midst of battle, waxing, you know, poetic about their mortality. But from it's super ironic from the perspective of Homer or whoever wrote this down, or who was orating this, because they're talking about these people worrying about being nameless when their actions of being the narrator perpetuates their name.
Right.
So
yeah, and I think it sort of gets to this idea of like almost historical luck, that like how many poems were written down that tried to sort of like make somebody, you know, have this long lasting legacy that have disappeared for whatever reason, or that aren't read. And so the fact that Percy by Shelley's poem lasted long enough as compared to, you know, other poems written about other Egyptian pharaohs that didn't last, you know, like there is a certain amount of just kind of random chance or luck to which stories and thus names live on. And it's also, I think, ties into the famous Shakespeare sonnet 18, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? When in eternal lines the time thou growest, so long as men can breathe, their eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. And right, like I teach this poem often with, you know, like 8th graders or freshmen, because it's a very sort of, the imagery is very simple. And then there's this interesting like thing you can do at the end of like asking about antecedents, like what is this that lives long? And it turns out that like it's this poem that lives long. And then when in eternal lines to time thou growest, it's like, oh, you know, the first time you read it, it's like, oh, it's about wrinkles, but then also lines of poetry, and there's this double meaning. But in that same way, right, like in some ways Shakespeare, in writing this sonnet, made this true, that like we are still reading this sonnet 400 plus years later, And so this person who he's writing about is immortalized. But how many other poets have written something about the person they love and nobody else has read it? And so, on the one hand, it can be hopeful that like, yes, we can create legacy, but also like, yeah, like maybe like 5 people get to create that kind of legacy and have books that are read for hundreds of years after.
Yeah. Yeah. The irony of wanting your name and your deeds to live on past when you die. The irony in that is that you can not be the one who carries on your own legacy.
Right.
Like you inherently have to rely on other people to do it for you.
Right.
So you ultimately have zero control.
Right. Yeah. And so I think Ozymandias and other critiques of this are less critiquing the actual phenomenon itself of kind of like history and more the personal desire to sort of defeat history, which some people sort of can, right? Like some people have been able to extend their legacy through story in these different ways, but the desire to do that is what is sort of the corrupting thing.
Yeah, being so self-aware during your life about trying to do something like that is like ultimately damaging. You should just live your life. So the other thing that we want to talk about in relation to these themes is the omen that comes during the battle. So an eagle holding a live snake in its talons flies across the battlefield. And
if you're reading an older translation, it's not a snake, but a dragon. Yes.
So we got a tiny eagle carrying a huge dragon. That's just the image that comes to my head when you use dragon. Yeah. But yeah, a serpent of such. The serpent bites the eagle, which makes the eagle drop the snake in the middle of the battlefield. So there's just a snake now. And then the eagle like squawks and flies off kind of in pain. And the interesting thing here is that Polydamas, the augur, he thinks that this is an ill omen. He thinks that they are the eagle in this scenario, and they might think they're going to be victorious, but
and catch the snake of the Greeks,
and catch the Greek snake. But ultimately, the snake is going to reach around and bite them. He thinks that it's an omen that the Trojans, should turn around, and Hector is so not agreeing with this guy. His speech is quite intense.
Which in itself, I think like we're pointing this out both because it's an interesting image in a fairly short book, and so it's obviously important, but also this kind of is Hector's first real moment of like disobedience against the gods and like rebellion from #God's plan.
Yeah, it's so interesting because so throughout this book, the narrator's voice reminds us multiple times that Zeus intends for Hector to have that heroic moment of breaking through the gates. So that's why it's at the very beginning and then mentioned multiple times. There's other Trojan guys who approach the gates, try to get through and can't. And it's specifically mentioned because Zeus is reserving that sort of special honor for Hector, which he does get at the end. Yeah, so a lot of questions about like why this omen, if it is from Zeus, are they interpreting it incorrectly? Because so I think I'll
just give us the whole thing.
I'll read this whole speech.
It's not that long, and it's good.
Yeah. So after Polydamas tells him, "I think this is an ill omen," Hector says, "Your words no longer please me. You know how to come up with better counsel. If you are serious in saying this, the gods must have deprived you of your wits. You tell me to forget the guidance given to me by Zeus himself, the god of thunder, who bowed his head to promise me success. You tell me to put all my trust in birds who flutter by, but birds are meaningless. I do not worry about them at all. Whether they fly towards the sun and dawn, eastward, to right of us, or westward, left, towards the darkness. Let us trust instead the plan of mighty Zeus who rules us all, the Lord of mortals and immortal gods. Patriotism is the one true bird. Why are you scared of war and violence? Even if all the rest of us are killed beside the Greek ships, there is still no danger that you will die, because you have no courage and no capacity to stand and fight. But if you flinch from battle or advise anyone else to turn back from the fighting, I shall immediately hurl my spear and slaughter you."
It's so crazy.
Yeah. Because he was told by a messenger from Zeus, he was told that when Agamemnon was injured and went back, then it was his time to charge and he would be successful.
Right. And so there's this conflict between,
Yeah.
I've heard directly from Zeus,
Yeah.
and you're using these birds as your intermediary. And so
Yeah.
again, we get to this kind of like confusion of the bureaucracy of like which signs are more valid and like which signs triumph over other signs, because normally like these augurs are respected and like, oh, they can divine what the birds are saying and those sorts of things. And so people listen to them. But in this case, like hearing from Zeus himself, you know, earlier is a sign that trumps over the birds. In many ways, it also gets back to the way that the kind of like courage and machismo and all of that might also be influencing this, where like, even if the birds did say they should retreat, to retreat would be seen by others as cowardly, right? Like, even if the gods did want them to turn back and sort of hold off, to actually do that, for Hector to like shout to his army, like, we're so close, but we're actually going to pull back, almost feels impossible for him to do, because as the leader, like they're so close to maybe defeating the enemy. Like, why would we ever pull back right now when we're so close to it? It sort of goes against the nature of war, that like when you're sort of close, you deal the killing blow.
Yeah, it almost feels like if this eagle and snake were sent as an omen by Zeus, if they were, it might be as a point of contrast or something to like almost test Hector. Because after Hector speaks, then thunder-loving Zeus aroused a gust of wind that blasted from the peaks of Ida and hurled a dust cloud at the ships, which baffled the minds of all the Greeks. Meanwhile, the god glorified Hector and the Trojans. Trusting the signs revealed to Hector and their strength, the Trojans tried to break the Greek wall. Which, that little follow-up makes me think that, like, I guess Zeus is like playing fun tricks.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Because, yeah, like Hector believes that Zeus has promised that they will defeat the Trojans. And that's actually not true. Like, Zeus has promised that, like, Hector will get some glory. But I don't think Zeus has ever promised that. Well, maybe he has and he's lying. Like, that's obviously a possibility. Like, maybe Hector, have you ever considered Zeus is lying to you? Or maybe, Hector, have you considered that you've misinterpreted the scope of Zeus's promise? That, like, maybe he promised that you would win today, but not the whole war. And you're thinking short term, where Polydamas is thinking long term.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's like they're going to be victorious in the short term.
Right.
But in the long term, they're going to get bit by the snake.
Yeah. And so Polydamas is thinking long term, but Hector is only thinking short term.
Yeah. But I do think that this moment is in here also to emphasize something we've talked about before, which is like the order and the chain of command on the different sides. Because we've talked about a lot how the Greeks have like a very messy chain of command. We don't really know what's going on over there. And like people are always trying to be in charge. But when Polydamas he's trying to bring up that like this might be an ill omen. He's very like worried that he's speaking out of turn, because he is. Like if this was on the Greek side, if someone told Agamemnon the same thing that Polydamas tells Hector, Agamemnon would honestly, he would like listen. He would not like make a huge deal out of it. You know what I mean? Like it would. You don't think so?
No, because remember in book 1, Calchas was the one interpreting what was happening with the disease in Apollo's sort of plague. And when he had to tell Agamemnon, like, hey, like you've asked me to do this, please don't punish me for bringing you bad news. Because basically his news was like, we've got to return the girl that you took. And so Calchas there was also terribly afraid that his king would misinterpret his words and punish him.
Okay. I do think that the difference, though, is that they did, at the beginning of the whole Iliad, they did ask him specifically to tell them what he thought. Like, they asked for his opinion. They didn't like his opinion, but they did ask for it.
Yeah.
And this is different because, like, Polydamas, he has not been asked for his opinion.
Yeah, and it's happening during a time of battle, not during a time of deliberation. Where,
Yeah.
in book 1, it was like in the tents, kind of like at night in between fighting. And here he's like going up to Hector, who like has blood on his sword right now. He's like, yo, let's stop.
Yeah, I mean, Polydamas says, so before he starts, when he talks to Hector, I suppose a common man must not speak out of turn in the assembly or the battlefield. We always have to magnify your power, but I shall say what I believe is best. So he is very wary to even say what he thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And in response, Hector, I shall immediately hurl my spear and slaughter you. Right. So I think that what we see on the Trojan side, in terms of like the chain of command and the order, is that if people do step a little bit out of line, there is like whack-a-mole style, like you immediately get knocked back down into your place.
Yeah, and I think in terms of leadership, this is like, there are obviously benefits from having one sole leader who everybody obeys, but it also means if that one sole leader is wrong, then there's sort of no recourse for correction, because this is the second time Polydamas has given Hector advice in this book, right? At the beginning, he was on Hector's good side of like, oh yeah, the idea of like, let's all dismount from our chariots and walk across because our horses won't be able to get across the trench. Great advice. Let's do that. And now when he comes, it's like, oh, bad advice. I'm going to kill you. And so Polydamas, and sort of by extension, all of the sort of underlings are totally at Hector's whim. And if Hector is right, that's great, because Hector can just sort of lead them forward. Yeah. But here, when Hector is wrong, when he has kind of misinterpreted these signs, it's obviously now that sort of strict order leads them down the wrong path. After Hector chastises Polydamas, he decides to ignore the omens and press forward with the fight. So there's more lines where there's more fighting outside the wall, Ajax and trying to, defend. But eventually the Greeks are all pushed behind the wall and they shut the gates. And so now the Trojans are sort of right at the gate, trying to bust it down.
Hector is the first to leap across the Greek wall, is what my translation says. So it's described, there's a lot of boulder picking up in this book.
Yeah.
It's a short book, but a lot of heavy boulders.
Yeah.
Strongman style, get lifted. So Hector grabs a boulder, which was lying before the gates. And 2 men, the strongest in the land, would have had difficulty lifting it up from the earth to load it on a wagon, at least as men are nowadays. But Hector lifted and wheeled it all by himself. The son of Cronos made it light for him, as when a shepherd easily picks up a ram's fleece with one hand, the weight is small. So Hector bore the stone towards the gate, where lofty double doors secured the entry.
Grond, 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 Grond. That's a shout out to all of our Lord of the Rings movie fans.
Yeah. So basically he throws the boulder at the gates. It, breaks them down. The bars gave way as the stone crashed into them. The doors were smashed and splintered into fragments. This part's great. Then glorious Hector leapt across, his face like sudden night, his body bright with bronze, a terrifying sight. And in each hand he held a spear.
That's really good lines. That's good poetry from Emily Wilson.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah. His face like sudden night, his body bright with bronze.
So a terrifying sight. So there's like internal rhymes. Yeah.
Yeah. Night and sight, like midway in both those lines. Yeah. Just a great image of, I like that, because Hector is often described as kind of the bright bronze one. Mm-hmm. And so I like
his armor.
Because of his armor. But I like this image of basically his armor is also bright, like his helmet and the rest of his armor is so bright that his face like sudden night. I get this image of within his helmet, it's so dark in there that he's almost faceless.
The other thing I noticed as you reread the description of his lifting the stone, there's an interesting as men are now, 2 men couldn't lift it. But then it later goes on to say, because Zeus made it lighter. Yeah. So it's actually not because Hector's super strong. It's because Zeus decided to make the boulder magically lighter for him. Yeah. Which I find this interesting. We're trying to be men now are so weak and men back then were so strong. It's no, actually Zeus just helped him out.
Yeah. Yeah. But this image of a shepherd easily picking up a ram's fleece with one hand, because I like that because a fleece is really big and fluffy, volume wise, it looks really big,
right?
But
It's wool.
It's actually incredibly it's not dense, so it's very light actually. So I think that's really cool. Yeah.
And it's actually the second recent wool related simile. There's another one earlier. I see you have an underline there that I noted too. That's another interesting, very non-warrior like simile.
And yet the Trojans could not rout the Greeks. Still they held steady. As a careful woman, a worker skillful with her hands, holds steady a pair of scales and keeps the wool and weight evenly balanced on both sides to earn a pitiful allowance for her children. So evenly the battle stretched between them until Zeus gave that very highest glory to Hector, son of Priam. I love when you get an image of a woman doing stuff with cloth and textile with her hands, because when we get to the Odyssey, we'll have a lot to talk about with Penelope's weaving, but how that image very easily translates to being used in similes for describing the ways that the gods kind of create these webs.
Yeah, or tapestries. And
how that relationship that they have to, that the gods have to the mortals is very much like a person, doing something with textiles. Yeah. I find very interesting.
Yeah. And then it backtracks to the shepherd who's sort of getting the fleece in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Book 13 is up next. We're into the second half, and it'll be interesting because obviously if we trust the omen that Hector did not trust, we know that the eagle by the end has snatched the snake, right? The Trojans have busted through the wall, and yet we know the snake is going to bite back. And so we kind of know, obviously we know because we read it, but even if you're reading this for the first time, you sort of know that it's not over here. The Trojans aren't about to win. And so somehow the Greeks are going to get out of this.
Yeah.
They're going to be super pushed back against their boats, and yet it's not going to be game over.
Yeah. I think that's the outlook that someone that a Greek back in the day listening to this would also be thinking.
Right.
They would know that the Greeks are ultimately going to be victorious, but it's great because they get pushed so far, to the brink of losing.
Yeah.
But deep down, the listener knows, these guys are going to come back from this. So the question, which is a great question to hold on to, is this, how are the Greeks going to come back from this?
And I feel like that trope is it's not a trope in a bad way. I think it's a trope in a good way that so many sports movies or things, or even Marvel movies, that so often that whatever hero, even if we know the good guys are going to win, there has to be a moment of the good guys being about to lose to make the sort of resurgence come back. The team is down 3-0 with only 10 minutes left. How are they ever going to come back?
Yeah.
And that makes the comeback more exciting. Or all of the Avengers are unconscious. How are they ever going to?
Yeah. I love that though. I love how you just especially when you're reading a Brandon Sanderson book.
Yeah.
You're I don't understand how they're going to win. The good guys. I don't understand.
Right.
What weird thing I think someone's going to pull out of their back pocket, or something is going to happen, but we don't really fully understand it, but it's going to solve everything.
Right. Because I think it is the sort of death and resurrection. They are so close to death, and yet they will somehow resurge. That sort of interplay is really enticing to us in so many, in sports and in war and in reading and movies and
because it has to be earned. I feel like we want our winners to really earn their win.
Yeah. I will have an audiobook of Samuel Butler's translation of Book 13 if you would like to listen, or if you're reading it alone in your own translation. We will catch you back here for that next podcast about Book 13 next week.
Yeah. Until then, happy reading.
Happy reading.